To a lot of the world, America's relationship with guns is, well, it's one of its most baffling and tragic paradoxes. It's an issue that just feels hopelessly stuck. So in this explainer, we're going to try to unpack the three key pieces of this puzzle: the foundational law, the deeply ingrained culture, and the absolutely staggering numbers that result when those two things collide. So the big question is this, right? Why would a country that values life and liberty so much also tolerate a level of gun violence that's become an almost daily tragedy? For anyone looking in from the outside, it's a genuine puzzle. And the answer isn't simple, because it's not just one thing. It's this really complex knot of history, law, and a very unique national identity. To even begin to get our heads around this, we have to start where America itself started, with its founding document, the Constitution. Because believe it or not, this entire modern-day politically explosive debate, its source code is right here, in the legal bedrock of the nation.
It's almost hard to believe, isn't it? But the core of this massive, countrywide political battle, the reason for all the protests, the heated arguments, the deep division, it all traces back to a single, fiercely debated sentence written more than 2 centuries ago.
And this is it. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It says, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Literally, every single word, every comment in that sentence has been picked apart, argued over, and taken to the highest courts in the land. It's a statement that has, no exaggeration, politically divided an entire nation. And here's the fundamental disagreement, the real split. One side reads this as an individual right, that any private citizen has the right to own a gun for things like self-defense. But the other side argues it's a collective right, meaning it's tied specifically to that idea of a well-regulated militia for the state's security, not necessarily for your average person to have a gun for private use. This one disagreement is basically the engine driving the entire political debate. Okay, so let's shift gears from the law books to real life and see how this right actually plays out in the daily lives of Americans. Because it's definitely not one single gun culture. It shows up in some very, very different ways. For a huge number of Americans, gun ownership is all about sportsmanship and the outdoors. Hunting for animals like deer, elk, and duck is an incredibly popular tradition, often a way of life that's been passed down through generations. And beyond just sport, there's a conservationist argument you'll often hear. The thinking goes like this: if a deer population gets too big, there isn't enough food to go around in the winter, and many end up starving. So from this point of view, hunting is actually seen as a necessary tool to manage the herd and prevent a different kind of animal suffering. And this is where the culture gets a lot more modern and, for many people, a whole lot more controversial. It's one thing to have a rifle out in the woods, right? It's another thing entirely to see one in a coffee shop. This brings us to the whole concept of open carry. In certain states, like Texas, for example, a licensed civilian doesn't have to hide their firearm. They can legally carry it right out in the open, on their belt, for everyone to see. And this quote just gets right to the heart of the tension. See, for the person with the gun, it might be a simple expression of their rights, a way to protect themselves. But for someone else in that same room, it can be a source of genuine fear, turning a simple trip for coffee into a really nerve-wracking experience. So we've got the law and we've got the culture. Now we have to look at what happens when you put those two together. The numbers here are, well, they're stark. They really paint a picture of the human cost of America's unique relationship with guns. Let's start with a number that is it's almost hard to wrap your head around. There are more than 390 million guns in civilian hands in the United States. Just let that sink in for a second. That is more than one gun for every single man, woman, and child in the country, with tens of millions left over. And this is the annual cost. Every single year in the U.S., roughly 39,000 people die from gun-related injuries. That's a staggering figure, but what a lot of people don't realize is how that number breaks down. So, when you hear a number like 39,000, what do you picture? The media tends to focus on one specific type of gun violence, but the reality is actually quite different. Take a look at this. The image of gun violence we often see on the news just isn't the whole story. The vast majority of gun deaths in America, a full 60%, are suicides. Homicides make up another 38%. And mass shootings, the events that get the most intense media attention, account for just 2% of all gun deaths. Now, this is a crucial point. While those events are absolutely horrific, they are not numerically the biggest part of the problem.
But even as a small percentage, the cultural impact of mass shootings is just enormous. These events, from Columbine to Sandy Hook to Las Vegas, they create these waves of national trauma and grief, and they become these infamous touchstones in the debate. They're a recurring and deeply troubling part of American life.
So, where does all this leave us? After looking at the law, the culture, and the stats, we're left with a deeply polarized country, what feels like an endless cycle of tragedy, and an international community that is just looking on in complete and utter astonishment.
These are the three pillars we've just walked through. You've got a foundational legal right that's interpreted in two completely opposite ways. You've got a culture that sees guns as everything from a tool for sport to a right to be exercised in public. And then you have the undeniable, shocking statistics of death that result from it all.
And so we land at the final, haunting question. It's the one that so many people both inside and outside the U.S. ask after every single one of these tragedies. With all this history, all this pain, and all this data, why does the cycle just keep going? It's a question that, for now, America seems either unable or unwilling to answer.